And now for real fun. Or now for some fun. Continuing my comments from the Revolutionist Handbook. Well, I don't guess in a sense continuing to try to pull the wool or the khaki over your eyes, even though I've denied it. It is just more commentary from the Revolutionist Handbook. Part 1. Although it is unsuspected, and it's almost inconceivable to the ruling powers, to the people, and to many of the recruits for a period of time, it can be correctly said that the ultimate purpose of the revolution is the transition of all maps. Or for those of you who like it more in comic book terminology, it is the destruction of all maps. Transition is really more what I intended to say, which is, I what? Said it. There is nowhere in the wiring of man, there's nowhere in the history of man, there's nowhere within those areas that the people would think are cultural precedent, subconscious memory, subconscious racial memory, religious memory. There's nothing in all of these apparent reservoirs to acquaint, to warn, to accommodate a man believing that some system, some new batch of information, that which seems to be trying to address the unanswerable questions that plague men's souls, that the ultimate purpose is the destruction of all maps. Now, of course, those are my terms, but I could change them around to where we could present it to the public in what would apparently be a more straightforward manner. And it is, I gave you a choice when I started out, and I said that it is unsuspected, but it is in fact inconceivable that that could be the purpose. What it amounts to on an individual level is this kind of transcension of all maps would be so that one would have no laical way of really being able to tell whether one was in a palace or whether one was in a public house, whether one was in Arcadia or Alabama. Now this is the way it would, for a verbal description, be affecting the individual. Now on what would appear to be a larger level, you have this matter of new information, as I presented this to you as somewhat of a question a few weeks back, of what could be more unexpected, what could be more unpredictable than what effect real new revolutionary information might have on the people. And you may, of course, include the ruling powers, the people, even some of the recruits, that is, people who believe that they are indeed involved with some mystical, extraordinary quest, or that they will be next week, that they should be. Now, apparently, for such a revolution to take place, there has got to be new maps, new drastic maps. I have, in fact, pointed out, if you recall, that new information has a tolerance for drasticness. I could put it to you in this manner, that a would-be recruit cannot pursue, should not be attempting to follow anywhere at any time what appears to be a system, what was being called a revolution, spiritual system, an occult teaching, whatever the hell it was. that a would-be recruit has no business attempting to follow any such system if apparently its central purpose is the correction of some previous system. Previous system also some present system, but one that was already established. Now here is an area I've mentioned before, but it's a prime one to go back and point out to you verbally. How things apparently are such at the 3D level, and then with just an attempted revolutionary view, it cannot be. And it's this. Take the world's major religions. The people, if they were asked about it, would look upon them all having, let's assume, a founder. We'll go ahead and blame Judaism on Moses. And Christianity will put upon Jesus, and Islam on Muhammad, and Buddhism on Sam. No Buddha. All right. The people's attitude, individually and collectively, that is, historically, says that there was a point, almost an exact point in time, that these individuals, through their life, through their effort, through their enlightenment, their revelations, established a, quote, new system, a new religion. And that's not so. There is a certain view that I could say that, I could support it, but you got to remember, of course, from some view, everything is true. But there is another equally valid view that I want you to see that begins to stretch 3D reality. And that is that those religions were not new. They were corrections. They were attempted corrections of already established religions. Now, the only reason I'm going back and trying to point out to you a differentiation, even verbally in this, is you find that this is a distinct area of apparent difficulty with people when they want to question, what should I be doing, how much effort should I be making, and also that eternal question that people feel that they eventually must engage in some kind of apostolic, some spreading of the word, whether I told them to or not, and of course your own curiosity as to how such as this might operate, or what life might do with it, or how it normally should be functioning. And it's always a matter of the information, the activity itself, the combination of the two, either being so drastic that it should, from one view, constitute a whole new body of knowledge, or to continue with my parallels, a whole new religion. And don't anybody, of course, take that personally. That would be the most drastic, that it is not somebody showing up, not a new revolutionist, not Moses revisited, not Jesus redone, not Muhammad warmed over in the microwave, but it would seem that it would have to be somebody with a whole new body of knowledge. And it would be so drastic that it would not be a correction of Judaism as it is, as Christianity as it is circa 1987. Just never mind all that there is nothing to correct. It's too far gone. It's irrelevant. It's of no consequence. That would be the most drastic from one viewpoint, would it not? Kids said that would qualify. If it is too drastic, what I pointed out to you before, if you recall, if it is too drastic, people cannot hear it. You would not hear it on an individual level if I made it too drastic. Assuming I could talk, just talk, in a way that was more drastic, more radical than I do to you. What if I said that just verbally, as much as we kick words around here and punch them out, at least insult them, and point at them and make rude noises, that there is a way that I could talk much more directly. All right, if that were true, and if I did it, then it would qualify into the far end of the radical spectrum, the radical end of the spectrum, that you simply wouldn't hear it. You'd hear the sounds, of course, but you would not get anything from it. That would be too drastic. Now, if you move across this spectrum to the point, the way life has always used this, the way life grows, is not just in so-called religious, revolutionary aspects, but in all manners. But in this matter in particular, it's got to move over to the point that people can hear it, and it sounds like it's a correction. It sounds like that if there's not a new captain on the bridge, there's a new first mate. And whereas the great Titanic might be headed too far north into the iceberg lanes, finally there's somebody new. In fact, he looks like surely he could be the great-great-great-great-grandson of Moses. I remember that profile. And he is now sitting on the bridge, and he calls out downstairs to the engine room. He calls out a correction in the course. Now, somewhere between the most drastic and the apparent correction that is so innocuous that you can't really tell one preacher from another, one religion from another, one idea from another, it all sounds like it was warmed over. Now, somewhere between those two extremes is what seems to constitute new knowledge, is what seems to constitute the beginning of some kind of new system, would seem to constitute, in a sense, a new institution back in the city. For a revolution to happen, you have got to have to take place. You have got to have that kind of information. And yet, I take you back to part one of this evening. That which is inconceivable, back in the city, to all the people, to all the ruling powers, is that what the revolutionist is up to is the transcension of all maps. Now that goes off of my spectrum, what I've spent the last 4 or 5 minutes reminding you of, about this spectrum, all the way from it being so drastic that people cannot hear it, all the way to it being so much of a mere correcting procedure that nothing has changed. Now, for it to be the transcension of a map, of all maps, goes off the spectrum. It is literally inconceivable. It defies any yellow circuit analyzation, because it is saying, in effect, all right, the supreme knowledge is knowledge, they'll do away with everything you know. That's one way of putting it. That's ridiculous. It is data that is so encompassing that once you have it, once it's revealed to you, once you read it, once it was told you and you heard it, your mind would once and for all go blank. I can put it that way. I mean, that's patently ridiculous. That it's knowledge that is so astounding that it makes you totally, unconditionally, once and for all, ignorant. That you are so smart that you no longer know nothing. Not even good English. You don't know nothing because now you know it all. It is still a transcension of all maps. Now, at least you think that I am perhaps staying too long on that repetition of the transcension or the destruction of all maps. And if that cannot be, let me refer you back to something else that I mentioned to you in closing a few weeks back, that a knowledgeable person faced with whatever it was they were attempting to do, the way I put it to you then was an easy shortcut way at the end of a tape, faced with their own difficulty, some problem. They're attempting to move from one place to another. That a knowledgeable person has two ways to go about it. They can attempt to think their way out of it or to feel their way out of it. And I did point out that one of the two was more efficient. Now I ask you, could you see any possible connection between that and me pointing out that the almost inconceivable purpose of the revolution is the transition of all maps? Yes, no, or maybe. There is a way in which you could say that from a revolutionary view, the death of all maps would be the beginning of revolutionary life. But also, with just a pig whistle of ordinary intelligence, you've got to suspect that something is amiss in your normal yellow circuit line of reasoning to think that you have taken what I've said, and it's said that supreme happiness or the ultimate revolutionary understanding would be to where your mind would go blank and you would not know nothing. That must not be exactly right. Because if it were, drugs would do it. Or if you remember my old, before I gave up surgery, or before they made me stop it, my old procedure that I've described to you of a Phillips screwdriver right through here and a tap with a hammer, I can blank your mind right up. And that procedure will take a load off of a man's mind. Of course, it'll take everything off the man's mind if you don't misstrike the screwdriver. So there's got to be more than that, wouldn't you think? If the kid would think, surely you would think. There has got to be more to it than that. Well, how about a few possible mores to it? Maybe this is related, maybe it's not. There's another thing about that revolutionist handbook. Now I've gone ahead and admitted to you, damn it, that there is such a thing. It came kind of loose-leafed. And I dropped it the day I got it, and the pages are not numbered is the point. And so I'm not sure of any particular sequence to this. Thus far, I found it personally to be no problem. That's just, of course, one man's opinion, but it's the only opinion I care for. But another part that seems to me, when I picked up this page, also each page seems to have, I guess you'd call it, kind of one idea. And so there I stood that day with these pages just there and no idea whatsoever of the order. It's just some of them I'll pick up in relationship to one I looked at last week or last year or whenever it is I look at them. And some of them seem to be related to the thing I just picked up, or last month. The last one I glanced at, I might remember, hey, this is connected with something I read in these notes sometime, maybe last time. So that's sort of the basis that I think to bring them up here to you. Do you follow all that? That there may or may not be any real relationship to any of this. But I would point out, as per the book, that the real revolutionist must soon realize that regardless of the planning, his intentions, and even the execution, that warfare is the ultimate uncertainty. It is as though in such a gamble that chance itself is the final factor. I guess some ordinary people in the city could say that fate is the supreme arbitrator. But warfare, and this is true back in the city, this is true if you were now trying to think about the state and the people and the revolution as being something external. It's true out there. All you've got to do is spend a few minutes with the right kinds of books throughout history. And those who were generals for the people and were literate at all, without exception, after a few drinks, after 70, 80 decades, after worrying about the historians, at any rate, they'll all admit one way or the other that Jesus, I know that you people think that me, big-time Sam Wellington, that was really a great stroke of genius, the way I took care of that little sawed-off fart out there. But I'm going to tell you the truth. Give me another drink. I'm going to tell you the truth. Warfare, Jesus. You're probably getting better odds at Monte Carlo. It is the ultimate supreme gamble. You plot. You maneuver. You reconnoiter. And it is still the supreme gamble. That's it. All right, those people out there admit that. And if they'll admit it out there, then no reason they admit it out there is things in them, in here, admitted it, and so they had to admit it out there. And since you've got it all, you've got to see it yourself, and you've got to feel it. That regardless of how you plot, plan, what your intentions seem to be, when it comes down to it, warfare of all kinds is like the supreme, the ultimate uncertainty. There is a reason I bring this up. I mentioned a version of this the last time we were here talking, if you recall. But you have got to see the importance. First, you need to see the difficulty remembering this, since I insist it has some very real practical significance. But then see for yourself the importance in what seems to be your own attempted revolution. That it seems as though it must be, if not a science, it's got to be something getting down to a fairly controllable art to do this. Am I not correct? Why else do we have monasteries throughout history? Why do we have today groups that you can go join, and they have a regimen? They have little ways to, not just in Sunday school if you're a Baptist, but you can go to and join these ashrams and places. And the guru, after 2 years, puts a purple spot here, and then after 4 years, and you've given up everything, he puts a green spot. You get to change colors of robes. You get to move your house trailer closer to his house trailer, his mansion. There would seem to be some kind of certainty. What else are all the rituals, if from no other view, what are all the rituals in all the world's religions for? All the holidays. I mean, sure, you like to go off from work and go out of school. But how about all the holidays and all the rituals with your family, all the rituals with your friends there at the church, the synagogue, the temple, the mosque, the things that you do alone at home if you're religious, rituals you follow each day, times to pray, certain foods to eat, certain ways to face to make your prayers, certain terms you use to appeal to your deities. It all seems to be to give some kind of at least acceptable picture of there being a structure. And if you've got a structure all the way from these massive buildings that apparently even a fair-sized Los Angeles belly shaker might not bring down, things that have been standing hundreds of years, then not only the buildings, but the teaching has been standing 1,500 years, 2,000 years, 3,000 years. The rituals seem to have an unflinching continuity to them. The revolutionist soon discovers, he has got to realize that warfare, we're talking about warfare now, that's what I mean by the revolution. It's by you making effort. It's by you welcoming. Okay. By you finding out how to use, what is it you people call it, kid? Bad luck. Bad luck. Bad luck and trouble. I like to thank Lightning Slim for that useful term. And the bed bugs keep biting me. To be able to use that. And yet the real revolutionist has got to very quickly realize that this warfare, not the rather passive acts of donating money, going through certain rituals, no matter if it takes up several hours a day to go through these same rituals over and over every day, and no matter what seems to be the salubrious effect on the people, the real revolutionist has an understanding. Again, I tell you that 3D terms we're leaving out a part. This is imperfect data here, but still it's a place to start. That this kind of warfare is, in a sense, the ultimate gamble. Why else, might I ask you, from one view, are people who believe that they're interested in such as this, why are they all suckers for prayer? Now, I don't care if they say they're praying to God, Jehovah, Lord Buddha, Vishnu, Allah, or whether it's now down to what is commonly referred to as a sect of some kind, that they are praying to the dear departed founder, even if large segments of the people have yet to recognize the dear departed one as being a deity. Everybody everywhere that gets involved with such as this, that believes that they're involved, believes that they want to be involved, they are suckers. More so, I suggest to you, than the general population of the city, which is bad enough. But people here are absolute suckers. They insist on it. We got to pray. And now I'm asking you, and forget all that kind of psychological babble. This is not National Blabber Week yet. It's chemically, there is a reason. And the reason is that the closer people are drawn to this, the closer they are born and are living in that part of life's nervous system, the more they feel that what they're being drug into is the ultimate gamble. And they are surrounded by the chemical noises of other little laboratories, that is, other little people that speak continually of certainty, 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 even if it seems to be negative certainty. That's better than no certainty at all. For people that say, well, geez, I don't know exactly what's going to happen tomorrow, but we can count on this, it's going to be shittier than today was. There seems to be a kind of comfort to that. Does there not? All you got to do, ask your own people. Right quick, have a little vote. Ask for a show of hands. It's better that than for the people to rise every day. And in some way, the message go out throughout the city that, all right, the sun's about to come up. You all got to get up. God knows what in the hell is going to happen today. What happens today may apparently have no relationship, or it may apparently have some relationship to what we thought happened last night. But as you people should know by now, we could get up today, and from all reasonable views, what goes on today is like we stepped into a whole new movie lot. Apparently we walked in on scene 3 of a movie being shot, and it's a completely different movie than most of us were involved with yesterday. That would be if a person had in some way affected a move like this within themselves, it would be the transcension of all ordinary maps. It would be the direct experience, not the fighting of, not the attempting to flee from, not the discomfort from, but the direct experience of warfare being the ultimate gamble. You got the plot, you got the plan, you got to have the intention to do this, but the real revolutionist knows that in a very particular way, the planning, that is the thinking of action, may apparently bear no relationship whatsoever to what is the ultimate action. To bring it up to where I'm trying to point toward tonight, the real revolutionist has got to see that you have got to plot. You've got to plan. If you're not acting, what else are you going to do? I mean, it's just only so many reruns of the new dating game that you can watch. There's only so long that you can be bored. And of course, all that's being funny, you have got to plot and plan anyway. Your yellow circuit would, if not atrophy, it would wither away, or perhaps even blither away. But the real revolutionist knows that after all the plotting that's necessary, after all the planning that is absolutely required, the warfare from day to day to what appears to be long-range effects and consequences of it in the 3D world, it is the supreme gamble. It is the ultimate game of chance. It is the zenith of uncertainty. And yet, if you're following any of this, if you can begin to put it together, back to where I started this evening, not only is that the way it is, the real revolutionist understands that that is the purpose. Not only as strange, as insane, as discombobulating as that seems to my 3D consciousness, what I'm actually working for is more of it. It's to make it better. Or the kid said, some people probably say, make it, what, worse? Worse, he said. You guys do know the part the kid's playing by now, don't you? At least most of the time he is. At least that's the part you're supposed to be playing. In other words, I started to say I couldn't afford a ventriloquist dummy. I guess I could afford it, but I'm not going to fool around holding some little figure up here with my hand up his coat. I don't consider myself a sexual prude, but I draw the line at some things. Especially as ugly as those little fuckers are. I think this is along similar lines. I'll go ahead and say, along similar lines, it was another one of those pages I picked up. As a would-be revolutionist, a recruit, who continues to attack, to criticize, attempts to correct an apparent foe, has not only not conquered the foe, but such a would-be revolutionist has never even properly engaged this seeming enemy. Now, I do believe, if you'll trust me on this, I do believe this may have some connection to what I was talking about of not pursuing any apparent system whose central purpose seems to be the correction of some other system. All right. Since from those heaves and haws I just heard, maybe one or two of you agreed that there might be some connection. Then if we were talking about the world out here, could you find some quite real, quite material validity to this kind of concept I just threw out? That if you indeed had apparently identified a particular foe, and you, to varying degrees, all the way from certainty, a certain proclamation and statement, to something less specific, that you have conquered this foe. You are on top of the situation. This foe is no longer even much of a foe to you. And yet you spend much of your time still bad-mouthing. And I started out and I said either attacking, criticizing, correcting. I was trying to cover a wide spectrum as usual. But just in general bad-mouthing. Or if you're a real revolutionist, I could say this. Speaking at all about the foe, then something should strike you as being fishy. And Kyroot has already pointed out, and for once I agree with him, me and the kid, that if something smells fishy, it is fishy. So what is going on? Let us say, still apparently talking about the external world, how about all the great philosophers throughout the ages that spent hundreds, if not thousands of pages attacking the people's religious ideas, attacking the concept of God. Of course, anybody attacking something, you do know. One reason that we all love to be criticized is that the undeniable perception is the person criticizing, at the very least, is tacitly stating that they are not victim of the very thing that they're criticizing. which is what makes critics so popular. That's why we all like to be criticized, because you understand that the other person is also stating that I do not suffer from this. So if we were talking about the external world, you should be able to smell something immediately. Not psychologically, that may be the way you would have thought about it. It is quite combustive, it is quite chemical. I don't want to get into very specific discussions about those kind of aluminum emotions and barium emotions. I'd rather stay on a more straightforward and non-technical level this evening. But you are correct that something would be fishy, to use my philosophers again, that a man continually rails out, no matter how intelligent he is, no matter how convoluted, no matter how impressive might be his verbal reasoning, that he spends all of his life pointing out the folly of the rest of you idiots believing in God. Whereas what he's insinuating is, I am too intelligent. I am above the level of being frightened by the Brothers Grimm and their cousins. And the person, of course, is not. They are not too smart. But now, let us bring this kind of activity where it belongs, is back internally. Can you see? Now you got to get ready, because you're not going to expect this. But now a lot of times you think I start off a song, by the time I sing the verse, you think you know what the chorus is going to be. And you shouldn't get too cocky, even if you believe that you're on the verge of getting your first stripe, or that you may actually be in uniform. Shouldn't get too cocky. How about in that great eternal division in each person of these two me's, this great dichotomy, binary nature of each and every human, the way in which the wiring system operates in the 3D world. Think about the way that one of your me's badmouths the other me. If there is an appropriate description that I could give for the relationship between the two me's, it's the badmouther and the badmouthee. And yet there is the feeling wired into all humans that at various times one of these me's, the one that seems to be the most civil, the one that seems as though it should and possibly can overcome the old Bubba me, that there seems to be some kind of status wherein one of them is making some continual attack, some attempt to attack, plotting to attack, planning to attack, having the very good intentions to attack, and of course all this infers to do better. And that some progress has been made. If the human organism did not feel like that some progress has been made, you wouldn't survive. You wouldn't get up today at bat. And so a man can say, well, now that you ask me, yeah, I still do drink, but I don't drink as bad as I used to. Well, yeah, I still punch women around, I guess, a little bit, but I got just narrowed down to a close personal group of female friends I have. And yeah, I am inclined to get in trouble with the law, but the last time I didn't get to 6 months. That there is some kind of improvement. If it's not done verbally, what I want you to follow is there is the feeling. Some of you might want to say belief. There is the feeling that I have made progress over my lesser self. God knows there may be a ways to go, but I have made progress. But as long as you have the inclination to criticize, to correct, to attack, to in any way badmouth an apparent opponent, you're living in the worst possible dream world, because you have not in any way conquered, defeated, overcome, even temporarily, this apparent opponent. You have never properly been engaged in combat? Who has any feeling? Who can even chemically feel any rationale to this, any reality? That you have accomplished nothing as long as you feel like that there is something to be accomplished. As long as you can badmouth any part of yourself, as long as you can still, some part of you talk about some other part of you, and you believe that you have done something, you've learned how, which doesn't take any ability, you've learned how to whistle in the dark. You've learned how to take the cartoons that life produces, I think a lot of you call imagination, and you take it as being something else. Okay, you take it as being imagination, at the worst, at the least. If you have any inclination, if you are driven to any degree to attack, to correct, to criticize, to in general badmouth an apparent opponent, forget about out here. In here, any idea that you have accomplished anything, any idea that you have on a temporary battlefield for a few moments at one time that you have overcome something and you have still got to badmouth that opponent. This is not a sermon, remember. If you can't use all this, you're not hearing it. If you can't use it, it's not interesting. So now the question is, that I'm trying to get you to face up to, even though you may believe that you're out in the bushes with me and that you're a revolutionist, that you're not a recruit, you're not a would-be, that you're right in there. How much ill will do you still have toward you? If you got any, then don't tell me that you don't qualify as being just a would-be revolutionist, or don't try and tell me that, hey, I'm a lot better than a recruit. Hell, I've been hanging around you for years now. If you got any complaints about you, and it's not open to any kind of discussion about, well, it's not about me because I realize that I'm not actually me. I realize that life has wired me up certain ways, and you can try and repeat, you can try and refine, you can try and give me your own cockamamie jazz version of what you think I've said. And be that as it may, if you still hold any enmity toward yourself at all, then we're not talking about any kind of victory. We're not talking about any kind of progress, even on a small scale. We're not even talking about you having been engaged in any kind of battle. I have a fearful, I've been hit by a fearful wave that when I started this last piece that I did not make it simple enough to start with. Does everybody understand? Can you imagine a little kid? Little kid, you see, coming home, a first or second grader, and he keeps talking about this guy named Philip the Pinhead at school. And at once he pushed him around and really humiliated him, beat him up. But now, one day I called his bluff, and he backed down. In fact, he run the fence, and I told him. I called his bluff, just like you told me to, Dad. And now that son of a bitch won't fool me. Now he is yesterday's news, I don't have to worry about it. And the kid tells you that every day. Even those of you who may have the soggiest headwear on from being out in the bushes, you surely hear that something would be a little fishy with a 7 or 8-year-old kid that keeps saying, boy, did I show him? You're talking about that guy that you told me you backed down 10 months ago. Yeah. Boy, he won't fuck with me. He gives me a wide place in the road when I come by. And he tells you this every day. That is how simple I intended to start this. But now, you take it as being another subject entirely, that you still have complaints about you. Let me jump around to another page. I have had, quantitatively speaking, much reaction. Enough that I point out that I've had much reaction from you people here, from you people in other places and other times getting this on tape, writing to me concerning the bits I went through off and on for a while of asking you, originally the way I brought it up, you recall, was asking you, why would a reasonable man, why would a real revolutionist own anything, have any possession, if it was not either useful or beautiful? I still get reaction. I still get people writing me about that, people threatening to give away everything they've got and contribute the money to us buying new equipment, or me to be able to buy a new pair of pants or something, or just giving away all their equipment and everything they own and just not buy anything else, or at least wanting to tell me that they thought about it. It has spurred a multitude of reactions, much interest in people. But now let me ask you something. That I make the preface of this part simple enough, that many, many people here found that to be of interest. All such things as I can conjure up, you ought to find, for nothing else, to get really off the subject of interest that I've asked you before, is how things work in a topographical manner. Why is it that I can apparently conjure up new data, or it may just be a new way of looking at something, but you never heard it, you never thought about it, to point out that all possessions, if they're worthy of keeping, if they were worthy of you getting them to begin with, they had to fit into one of those two categories. They had to fit into one of the two possible reasons that a human would want anything. It is useful, which is synonymous with saying it will save me labor, it will save me burning up certain amounts of energy, it will cut down on the percentage of energy I must use. It's either that or it's beautiful. In some way, my senses, most of it would be to look at, but it could be to listen to, it could be to smell. But it has got to be something that one of the five senses. You could be blind, it'd be a piece of statuary that you felt of. It could be a varnished basketball for all I know. But everything that you've ever wanted in your life fits into one of those two categories. And you can see that the so-called desire, motivation, is one of the two in everybody. I don't care who it is. You can say, well, it's a crazy person, and it would still have to fit in. You just stuck with it. It's like all the information you get comes in through the five senses, as long as you're living in a 3D city. So there's that question I said was completely off the subject. But some of this, it appears to be new pictures, new picturizations, little new areas of a made-up universe that I make up again from week to week, from night to night, of how I can apparently pull them in, how I can conjure them up, and nobody else ever thought about it. But why, by God, it fits. And every time I point out that, hey, here's something that is only one of two things, or if there's only one of three things. Have you ever noticed if I do it, and I invite your participation, your correction, to find an alternative, find one that I missed, find one exception, and it all always fits. That was a completely aside off the subject. Back to the filet mignon of the fun. In this question about why would a reasonable person, and of course I was being somewhat verbally facetious and referring you people, why would you continue to possess anything that was not either useful to you or beautiful to you? Back to that subject. Let me expand it and ask you, can you perceive of your personal habits as being possessions? If so, same question. Same question, motherfucker. What are you doing? And by habits, I mean everything. I don't mean what's just normally considered bad habits, smoking or drinking or picking your nose. The bad habits of you, the very things that you feel as though you should be attacked for, the very things that you feel as though some part of you should take remedial action against these other parts. Can you perceive of those as possessions? And the same question holds, I ask you. Why would you continue to possess any habit that was either not useful to you or that you did not find attractive? The kid's got his watch on, I think. Let's take about 30 seconds and everybody try real hard Now remember, by habit, I mean you at the minor league level. You in uniform, in your position, all of your glory, all of your warts. I guess what a lot of the people back in the city would just call your personality in toto. What aspects of it, if you perceived it as the aspects of being your possessions, which ones do you still cling to, do you still have, that are neither useful nor attractive? All right, time is good. Before we turn the tape over then, I could, of course, ask the obvious, big old, why do you still have them? And why, after I pointed out in the previous part, would you still have them when you know, regardless of what they seem to be in themselves, unattractive, disuseful? Besides that, it keeps you involved with saying, I can push them around. It keeps you involved with criticizing them. Oh, this old thing, I don't know why I have this. You keep trying to correct them. Well, yeah, I know what you mean when you say about me, but I'm doing better. I'm going to clean that up. That you stay involved with believing that you've pushed a bully around, that you've accomplished something. If anything, if there is this kind of reality in the 3D world, if anything, you have made these possessions feel more and more at home. It's like having these some real ugly. It's real ugly, and there's no possible use for it, this thing you got at home. And rather than dealing with it, as a real revolutionist should, you dust it more often. You keep having nicer and nicer bases built for it. You move it over to a new niche. You put in track lighting on it, and it's the ugliest thing you got. It's the most unuseful thing imaginable, and yet it takes more and more a central place. Remember, we're not talking about real ordinary habits. We're not talking about morality. We're not talking about sins. I'm talking about the very things that seem to be part of your natural uniform, the way in which you play your position. The very things that seem to be the habitual parts of you, the distinguishing parts of you, the parts of you that you feel as though have got to be reformed, cleaned up, corrected. How would a reasonable man or woman continue to possess things that are neither useful nor beautiful? Back in the city, to start this part out, let me make this verbal note that the people throughout history, the city dwellers, the people periodically display a belief that life could be measured. But then they apparently lack the resolve to discover or to develop the necessary trigonometry. And yet, these solutions to what have always been called man's unanswerable problems of all natures, the solutions lie in the unrecognized fact of man's captivity in a world, the world in which he is conscious, the world that he is conscious of. It is a world of incomplete dimensions. Now, I believe I have made some reference in the past to this example that I thought most of you knew, and it's a fair one. It's as good as me trying to make up another springboard. But it was that turn of the century story of Flatland, that book that a fellow wrote. The part that came to memory that I assumed all of you knew, if you deal with the dimensions fewer than consciousness can mechanically conceive of, then you can draw the kinds of parallels that he did, and as I said, there's no need for me to try to improve upon it. And he tried to picture through words what would appear to be one dimension intruding into a lesser dimension. And the springboard that I was going to use would be right below that which is native to man, as he was trying to picture how it would be that if people were living on a plane, that if all of us in our consciousness, our perception were a plane, that we were a two-dimensional creature, that your eyesight was like the thickness of a piece of paper. And that's where you were living. You could look over here, and you could look over here. And the things apparently had width and breadth, no height. You just was right here. And I believe his picturization, unless I'm making this up, but I think his picturization was, what would happen if then you had like a bicycle wheel or a piece of cardboard, and it was colored with different axes drawn through the center, and there were different colors, and in some way you could take this wheel and make it run through. Happen if then you had like a bicycle wheel or a piece of cardboard, and it was colored with different axes drawn through the center, and there were different colors, and in some way you could take this wheel and make it run through the plane. You understand? Like a bicycle wheel stuck in water. And if you consider the film of water being two-dimensional consciousness, then this wheel going through. Then his picturization, his imagination of it was, just be miracles. That these little two-dimensional creatures would see stuff come from nowhere and suddenly pop into their universe and then just disappear. And no matter how they can look as hard as they want to this way and as hard as they want to that way, they will never, simply because of the physical configuration of this made-up universe, this imagined universe, they could never conceive of where in the hell did that stuff come from? Because it came from a right angle. It came from up here, and to them it does not exist. It just suddenly pops into consciousness and it's gone. Maybe it pops back. It's miracles, that's all it is. Ghosties, goblins, psychic experiences, guides. Well, at any rate, I thought all of you had read that years ago. That is a fair place to start. Now, beyond that, I've never known of any ordinary story. I could be wrong, but now some science fiction may have tried something like this. But there is not an easily describable parallel when you start moving up to what would be the fourth dimension going into the third. And you're not going to get anywhere with ordinary consciousness talking about a fifth coming into the third. But the way in which I've been describing it, to try and catch us up to date right quick, is I've been describing a kind of 4D time consciousness, that everything would be different. Everything. Not theoretically, not in science fiction lore, but I'm telling you, or else I don't understand anything. In some way we have all been deluded, which I guess all of you could have been. At least I know one person is not. Thank you, kid. That if you had a non-stop, seamless, continual awareness of time, just what ordinary people mean by time right now, regardless of what I may understand about it differently. If you had that, then all things are connected. Life is seamless. There are no such things as contradictions anymore. It's simply Monday becomes Friday in another year. The same day that the 12th of never fell this year, it falls on the Ides of March 22 years from now. The people that you loved and kissed X amount of hours ago, you now are throttling. Time teaches everybody a lesson, if people could learn a lesson. Now, there is a kind of unknown trigonometry of me, I guess, stretching the real definition of an area of mathematics in charge of measuring, since I started saying that the people oftentimes have this periodic belief that they express that, yeah, life could be measured, and that's always been the end of it. It's as though they did not have the resolve. You could say they didn't have the methods. Well, all right, you could say that. But then I would suggest that until I decide to ever go back in this area, that rather than you say the methods, how about life seems to have not instilled in man the resolve thus far on any widespread level to either develop or discover, whichever would be the case, this kind of transcendental trigonometry, the necessary trigonometry to measure what's going on. Now, when I say that there seems to be a periodic belief that sweeps through the city that life can be measured or could be measured, and I say that they never seem to have the resolve to pursue it, that is the necessary trigonometry, that does not belie the fact that they apparently do attempt to pursue it, but they always do it on the same old binary means. And they're attempting, at the very least, to measure a 3D world, at the very least, through two-dimensional trigonometry, C and D, this way or that way. They are attempting to take the measure of life always on the basis of binary measurements, whether it be good and evil, proper and improper, or true or false. Or just, I'm trying to measure it, or I'm not interested in measuring it. Now, on that basis, you would have a situation that would not be dissimilar to the flatland story and the colored wheel continuing to slice into their two-dimensional sight. Things come and things go. You attempt to plot it, you attempt to measure it, and you're lacking one dimension. You're lacking the dimension that, in essence, even allows it to make any sense. Everything that is unanswerable, everything that seems to be a mystery, and it does not have to be simply that which you might, or your neighborhood might, couch in spiritually mystical terms. It could be that you still wonder, what is the nature of life? What is our relationship to the gods? Whatever kind of that romantic flim-flam may still be running around your circuitry. All the way from that to just, where's the end of the universe? How can they say the universe has no end? Everything's got an end. What in the hell am I doing here? Why is everybody else, by and large, a bunch of dumbasses? All of that, all of those questions, man's unanswerable questions, have a solution of the first order. And the first solution is the unrecognized captivity of man being conscious of being in a world, but the part he is not conscious of, this world is one of incomplete dimensions. All of the mysteries, all of the unanswerable questions are simply man's best view of incomplete pictures. All of the mysteries, all of the unanswerable questions are simply his best conception of imperfect data. Now, specifically, why should I have to point this out? I was going to say I specifically chose those words as opposed to what? Well, the ones all evening that I didn't choose. I won most of them in a raffle. Well, because it is not man's shortcomings. It is not man's cursed position. The things that man cannot answer, all the way from the apparent so-called great cosmic mysteries down to the mystery of why do you do me like you do? Why do I keep getting attracted to men who mistreat me? Why do I keep getting attracted to women who always disappoint me? Why do I keep doing the same dance around and around with my parents? From the great mysteries down to the little mysteries, they are simply man's best view of incomplete pictures. His best view. Man is getting better. His eyesight is improving. His consciousness improves. I keep pointing that out. You should have that feeling within yourself, not as some kind of theory from me, but you should be, if you properly belong here, you should feel that kind of sympathetic, genetic vibration throughout your nervous system that, yeah, things are getting better. There's just no doubt things are not coming apart. But the mysteries, the questions that cannot be answered still fall within the verbal description I'm giving you. They are nothing but man's best view. His best view of incomplete pictures. So you've got two things if you're dealing with incomplete pictures and you give it your best view. If you were the smartest people in the city and you had the best view, you can take that as being the greatest amount of ordinary intelligence, education, sophistication, three-dimensional wisdom. It is the best view of incomplete pictures. That which cannot be answered is simply the best conception of imperfect data. So if that is what you're dealing with, which is what you're dealing with, if you're only three-dimensionally conscious, you can be the epitome, you can be in the avant-garde back in the city of man's best view, of man's best perception. But when you're dealing with imperfect data, when you're dealing with incomplete pictures, you surely see a potential problem here, do you not? Whereas I'm telling you there are solutions, as I've always hinted, if not slipped up on some night in my weakened condition and admitted it. The very things that you think can't be answered, the very things I guess that you always thought or hoped I would answer. They got answers, but you should see by now that back in the city, at the level of ordinary consciousness, something is amiss. Either you are cursed, you and everybody else, or that regardless of your hopes and suspicions that some of these things just can't be answered, and St. Augustine of Rhino, of Hippo, was correct. They can just, in some way you can almost theologically, logically prove that some things God don't want you to understand. Or you can believe that in some way man's level of consciousness has not reached a level that we can peer into the real depths of the material basis for life and thus discover what creation, how creation came about and brought us up to the level of so-called human consciousness so that we could answer this. You can believe all that, which is going to leave you going to the grave still with the questions unanswered. Or you can try and make some use out of what I'm telling you. It is not simply the basis of man's best view is not good enough, that man's best perception presently is not adequate. Not that that doesn't come into it, but it is not singularly that. It is that what we have in your case and in everybody's case back in the city is you've got man's best view of incomplete, imperfect data. But it's not hidden in the sense that man's mind's been clouded from making God mad. And it's not because human consciousness and the human spirit is crumbling and going downhill and now we don't even understand the great mysteries of life we're in. I'm just sure back in Atlantis and on the lost continent of Mu, or whatever the hell it is, that back then we had superior creatures. We had little Indians eating corn fritters and going around naked, but they had flying saucers down in South America 3,000 years ago. Right. Yeah. The kid said the New Age convention is, you took a wrong turn. It's 2 doors down the street. That things are crumbling, and used to, people understood this. They used to, our great, hoary, feral, unpolluted, great grandfathers and mothers, hell, they understood this just like that. They just got in the morning and somebody'd have an unanswerable question, and they'd go, oh, here's the answer to that, and they just knew it. But now through all the things that have brought down humanity, his love of comfort and wanting to have wisdom and air conditioning and canned foods, we've now reached the point that we don't understand anything. You are dealing with incomplete information, and if you had the understanding, if you had the perception, of course none of that really describes it, but if you did, the answers lie, the solutions lie, the more complete vision, the more complete pictures, the expanded data lie in the realization, personally, the realization that you are a captive. At ordinary levels of consciousness, you are a captive in a world that is dimensionally insufficient, that you are consciously, or you should be, parking in a handicap zone, and you don't know it. That ordinary consciousness, on at least one level, that many of you have already had taste of, that I can almost push some of you into, that's no longer a matter of some kind of weird discussion. That you can see that there is another dimension right here. As I've said, it's not spirits, it's not little ghosties and the wee little people hiding behind, like the kid back here behind the panel. It's not any of that. It's that there's another dimension right here at all times, and given your best perception, given it your best view, what you still pick up are only three dimensions. What you pick up is imperfect data, incomplete pictures. If you just had the continuing awareness of time, and I will admit to you one more time, I could describe this in several ways. And time is just one of them, but time would seem to me that it should be the most immediately usable with you to see the inseparable connections. There is a flow that is not linear, because no one can make sense out of that. It all appears to be false starts, missteps, fits and starts, and it all appears to be in isolation. Everything seems to be separated, or by and large most things seem to be separated and fairly irrelevant one to the other. Whereas what I am intending to convey to you by the term 4D sight, 4D time sight, is the data that's available is expanded. The pictures are more complete. The data is expanded to the point, the pictures are completed to the point that everything that you and everyone else has always considered to be the great unanswerable questions, and even the small unanswerable questions, are fucking answered. Not verbally. It's the good old look method. You suddenly look, and there it is. If you understood, if you could see the position, if you could see where human consciousness is compared to other things going on, which I don't know that I even have to point this out, what I seem to be pointing at, or what you must think I'm obviously pointing at perhaps, you could also see as being the great wellspring for all of man's ideas of supernatural forces, deities, mythologies, unanswerable questions, UFOs, not UFNs, but UFOs. All ghouls, goblins, trolls, fairies, we people, you people. That there it is. Anything you want to believe. All stories of Superman, all stories of Atlantis, the stories of the Garden of Eden. There it is. It is at least like an inside-out black hole. Instead of eating everything up, it gives everything up. Anything you want to imagine of how things could be better, how the human imagination, that is the cartoons, of what might complete all this, what might make all of this make sense to me, It's all as though this kind of black hole, this bottomless pit that no one can really identify, turns out all these possibilities. Ooh, it could be that. Well, you can go ahead and form a whole school, a mystical school on the, oh, it could be that theory. Well, no, I guess we're too late. They've already done that. They call it something else, but it's, could be that. Ordinary 3D sight, as I was kind of brushed against, it sees all human moves as just being just a series of fits, starts, hesitations, missteps, realignments, attempted correction. But it's always these little jiggled up pieces of a little something happened. It is the nature of human consciousness. I've attempted to describe it all the way from chemically to at times in the past what appeared to be a psychological basis to try and get your attention. It is the way consciousness, it is the way that the top end of our nervous system now works in the city, that you have got to be able to classify things. You've got to be able to separate I from not I. You've got to be able to separate red from green, tall from short, heads from tails, or the city would not function. The sewers would run uphill. When you flush the toilet, God forbid what would happen. 3D sight sees all of this as being isolated bits. Bits, fits, starts, restarts, hesitations, complete breakdowns, restarts, missteps, realignments. But what I mean by 4D sight, it would reveal human existence, and I mean this in a non-judgmental sense, so I'm going to say this is more of a technical use of the term, but it would be true automation. That is not a judgment now. It doesn't mean that humans would be machines or that humans are machines, but it would be true automation in the clinical, if not technical, use of that term. That is, it would reveal that human existence, rather than being fits and starts, missteps, isolated pieces, things happening over here that apparently is just a sudden bout of insanity, and then another bout's over here. It would be the revelation that this is all a kind of true automation, and that is that every move that can be seen, every step is an integral part of an infinite sequence that is, and that each step is inseparably connected to all things fore and aft. To jump from revolutionary terms to jump ship, as it were, into the Navy. That true automation, and I guess I may be stretching a bit from the technical use of the term, but so what? I'm still fairly close. It would reveal, rather than these isolated fits, bits, starts, stops, hesitations, restarts, isolated pieces that make no sense, that which the human mind, from philosophers to a bricklayer after a couple of PBRs, trying to think about life, trying to think about political problems in some part of the world, trying to think about the way he ended up with his third wife who's just like the first one, trying to think about some little something. Why do Slim Jims have gone up 3 times in price, whereas my automobile hadn't? Oh well. Instead of all this, to realize, to see for yourself, and then to feel the reality of this being a true automation, not a judgment, not a negative thing, would be that all of this that appears to be any sort of move whatsoever, all change being good, but to be more specific, tonight's direction, that every move, every action that you can conceive of as being human is a part of true automation, in that they are all an intricate part of an infinite sequence. An infinite sequence. All parts of which are inseparably connected from everything fore and aft. I hesitate to go ahead and say that, what you would expect, I'm sure. Everything that's gone before and everything that will come after, because that brings us back firmly on the two-dimensional level. As a little two-dimensional people, if they can look this way, they can see breadth, or they can look over here and see width. If you'll imagine, if you'll try real hard back to flatland of the bicycle wheel, true automation, the true infinite sequence in human existence, wherein all things are a part of this infinite sequence, then that which human consciousness now says, well, this happened over here, this happened over here. This happened at this time, and this happened at some other time. It's only through a lack of dimensional awareness that something that's happening up here at a right angle didn't happen before or after. It appeared to happen before or after down here. And it's only when it flashes through that the one part of the bicycle wheel, the one part of this colored wheel that's red, it flashes down for a split second here at eye level consciousness, at two-dimensional world, and it's red, and after that comes the color blue. At that level, the best sight, the best perception of men at that level tells them one thing. That is, red came before blue this time. God knows where either one came from, they just happened. But first there's red, then there's blue. Who knows the connection? We can point out a sequence. It did happen in time, but it did not happen in time. If you could get above it, if you were a three-dimensional creature, you would see, hey, you people are not looking at time. You think that there's red that suddenly come into your world and followed by blue. That one of them existed and it disappeared and then another one existed. They both exist. And on this wheel that I cut up, if you followed it, and there are different colors, and there's red and blue, and it's coming this way, they say that red comes before blue. Blue comes after red in time. You could see that it doesn't. It's their perception of which way it's turning. You could turn it the other way. You've seen the wheel. You know that there's no place to start on a wheel. Red does not follow blue. But you would also understand, all right, you people down there, you little two-dimensional people looking there, based upon your best perception, based upon your best view, it is true that this is all miraculous. It is also true that red comes before blue, or it did just then. That's true. But the thing is that it's your best, giving it your best shot. Your best view is incomplete. And that which you take to be miraculous, that which you take to be isolated, or, if you can listen real quick, that which you take to be a series of linear cause and events. That every time, let's say that we get the wheel spinning, and we let it spin for X amount of days or years, and it continually, red follows, or blue follows red. So it's an accepted scientific fact that every time you have red, it will cause blue to come into your two-dimensional world. To them, that is linear cause and effect. But if you were standing back in a three-dimensional condition, seeing all this, you realize, nah, you people, that's your best view, but it's not true. There is no cause and effect between red and blue. They would be at a severe disadvantage. They would be subject to all kinds of mysteries. There'd be answers that they could never find the solutions to. Of course, you can imagine what kind of religion and gods they would conjure up. To being able to see true automation, to be able to see that there is an infinite sequence, to be able to see that there are things going on, this, like everything else, is not perfect, but it is good enough for me to continue to use it. It is almost as though it is running at a right angle to the three-dimensional world, except you realize there's no way that you can deal with ordinary terminology, ordinary consciousness, and me picture for you a 3D world in which 4D things are happening, similar to the 3D world of the wheel spinning to a two-dimensional world. The closest, or it should be, the one that I've been encouraging now for a while with you, the one that is pregnant, is that time can be seen literally right now as being the fourth dimension. That time, if you had a continuing, coeval consciousness of time along with everything that you think you're seeing, everything that you think you're experiencing through all the senses, even considering your brain as being the sixth sense, If you saw it as time, is the way that I attempted to draw out my little example a few weeks back of drawing on the white bulletin paper with a white crayon, and you couldn't see anything, and then I took the watercolor and brushed it over it and called that time, and then C, D, and E stood out. But of course you had the picture that time was not just a two-dimensional brushing on that paper, it was not just a three-dimensional brushing. Time in that sense, if we were fishies, time would be the water. If the fishes had 3D consciousness, they can look up, they can look down, and they can look to the side, and they could orient themselves in a 3D world. And you ask a fish about the water, and the fish that's most perceptive, their best view, based on their best view, when you talk to them about water, the fish are going to say, water, what water? It is a similar situation, not perfect, but that would be similar to your conception of time. It is the irrelevant, exploded. It would be as though it were a kind of reward, to be a kind of revolutionary payoff, if you could see all of this as being truly a process of automation. Not mechanical in a 3D sense, but it being truly automational in that everything that happens has a connection to every other movement that happens. It would be an improvement. This is really beside the point. If I throw this in, it would be a slight improvement if you just had the linear sense of this being true automation. In other words, that things over here that you disapproved of, apparently, things that you found to be absolutely irrelevant, if not distasteful, if you could just, on the linear sense, which can't be done, but it'd be like if you could live on a 2D level and some way back off and have a greater 2D level than everybody else, which you couldn't. But if you could, at least you begin to see on that level that there is an automation to this, that things do not just happen randomly, that things do not happen in isolation, that there is no such thing as terrible, there is no such thing as decay. That would be, if that were possible, that would be at least a linear sensation of infinite sequence. And if there were such a thing possible as linear, then you would realize, all right, everything that's happened over here, apparently down the linear line, without a doubt is affected not only by what just happened, because even my brother-in-law can see that, but then you'd have the awareness that's affected by what happened 2,000 steps back, 22,000 steps back. And then if that were possible to be linearly more aware, you would then have a kind of knowledge of the future that whatever is going to happen is going to be tied to this. That would be true automation. That would be an understanding of it. There would be no mysteries if that were possible. What I'm telling you that you consider to be totally beyond comprehension, not just philosophically, but just the kind of everyday, little nit shit, penny ante, red-ass things that bother you in life, from the way people act to the way you act. If you had time consciousness, there would no longer be mysteries. There'd be no discussion about, why do I do this? There sure as hell wouldn't be any discussion about, should I stop it? Or there sure wouldn't be any kind of question or discussion about, well, how do I stop it? I'm going to have to wrap up. I want to say, on the public side of the tape, throughout time of me doing this, I've never mentioned this exactly, I continue to get questions and little observations that some of you have made, that you've had experiences since being involved with this and me, that not only seem to be some kind of undeniable new experience, some kind of revolutionary sensation, but the term that's come up several times from some of you that's just perfect, as you described it, that it almost had a feeling of it being a sexual jolt. And you asked for my comment, or you just left the observation that you, I'm sure, felt was extreme and weird enough that I would finally someday respond to. And I've had enough over the recent times that I should make some response. I am fully aware of that. I'm fully aware of the feeling of being involved with this kind of activity and something so joyful happen that it is truly, it feels almost sexual. It is not unusual to be expected that some of you have felt that toward me, that you felt that just the experience of something happened and it was like almost that I was tied up as some kind of erotic potential subject with you. I understand that completely. Now let me point out real quickly, we only got 2 or 3 minutes. You'll be surprised, those of you who can hear, how quickly I can give you something about this. Insofar as an experience involved with this, apparently something has happened, an experience, a series of experiences, and it almost feels as though it's a sexual experience, then take this. That when things are of such a joy, when something is of such a pleasure, the kind we're talking about, it has got to find a ready means of expression. And what is the readiest available? And I am not in any way discounting, I took the time to respond to this, and I'm not in any way making light of this because I understand it completely. But also you might think right back, and then if I can talk fast enough, how about, not just from me, not as crude as I talk, you know, at least you got to admit I'm getting better to refer to it as sexual and sensual instead of fucking and stuff like that. But think back to all the religious literatures for thousands of years in all religions. You've got would-be saints, holy men, learned rabbis, talking about some kind of closer experience to the gods, the cosmic forces, and they always tried to be pretty nice about it. But if you can hear, they would infer, they would try the picturization. It was almost as though I was giving myself to the gods or the great truth. It almost felt like a sexual experience. We got problems? But just, at least any of you get too excited by that. I understand it completely. I can feel it at times. It happens to you that some of you feel as though you are in the midst of, or should be, or that you are feeling even an erotic feeling directed toward me, since I'm the obvious one to see involved with this as far as you're concerned. But look at it as being an experience when things are so pleasurable. And I'm talking about pleasurable now in a way that is unprecedented in your life. It is not normally available in the city. Ordinary stimulation of the senses do not cause this, and it happens, and there's got to be some expression for this kind of joy. And just because you may be now undergoing some kind of, at the beginnings of some revolutionary change, it does not simply, like that, stop you from being a sexual creature. And the kid said, thank God for that. It has to find expression. And just look at life in general. Look at life as you know it in the bushes and in the city. The ready expression of extreme joy is what? So, those of you that have asked me and made comments about that, if you thought there's anything strange or perverted about it, or you're off on the wrong track, just extreme pleasure. As I was trying to point out, those involved with pretty low-level activities out in the spiritual world, the religious world. They have tried to indicate through their poetry and through their allegorical confessions of love for God, that same kind of thing. I could even, I don't want to take away any of the joy, but I can imagine of the real bourgeoisie, the real hoi polloi, the real people in the city. I can imagine just a quite ordinary guy winning that $40 million lottery in the Pennsylvania drawing yesterday. I can imagine that making certain people so happy that you might find them sexually aroused. You might find winning $40 million to be potentially horny making. 10-4.
And Kyroot said, well, as long as we're all here, and seeing how there are a few more, well, I guess we might as well read them. That is, the UFNs, that is, the son of unidentified flying nevers, or is it grandson of?
Never believe them when they tell you, you can't let it get you down. Yes, you can.
Never refer to an overweight Mongolian yak salesman as weenie breath.
Never forget, if everyone else is who they say they are, who does that make you?
Never, when you hear a famous person drone on and on about how they still live in a small town, neglect to feel sympathy for the small town.
Never admit that you're a particular fan of anything, any particular thing.
Never, while on a furniture shopping spree, mistakenly purchase a pit bull instead of a pit group.
Never share a toothpick with a Lapland herdsman.
Never depend too heavily on a person with many talents.
Never write any words or phrases in Latin to anyone unless they're the sort that would do it to you first.
Okay, where are we? Okay. Never admit to reading anyone's biography. Why should you?
Never speak of a lolling motorcycle gang as that simply dreadful bunch.
Never listen to so-called serious music if you find it tends to make you serious.
Never tell a prospective father-in-law that your middle name is Coors and that your favorite shoe is the loafer.
Never whistle Whiggish tunes in Tory territory.
Never believe a professional wrestler, even on a stack of pancakes.
Never, in a fancy restaurant, attempt to clean your palate with a 1957 vintage paint thinner.
Never, after the age of 12, should you bronze your children's feet.
Never open a plumbing store in Flushing.
Never attempt to repair a kidney tear with duct tape.
Never be too impressed with a rags to riches story until you determine whether the parties involved had the state monopoly on the rag trade.
Never smile and say cheese unless you're being swindled by a man named Kraft.
Never enroll a nervous child in a preschool that uses early morning approach of jump-starting their little brains.
Never, when reading a book or a poem that has God as the hero, should you expect much in the way of suspense. Or surprises.
Never pay attention to people who say, no need to be crude, when they mean no need to be personal or specific.